research, because it, as you know, it means that all kinds, everything should be, you should specify aims and goals on different levels, and then there will be measurements of this. And so, for instance, there is a very intensive counting of how many articles you have published in what journals, how many people have been examined, and so on and so forth. And the quality aspect of everything that we are doing is, of course, as you all know, very much more difficult to measure and so on. So that, I'm afraid, is deprioritized, or that runs the risk of being deprioritized. We are still, and then I'm saying me and my colleagues and so on, most of us, I think, are a bit frustrated with this. So there is an ongoing struggle, sometimes on a formal level, sometimes on a kind of guerrilla-based level, to resist this, but it's there, no doubt. Okay, so it's publicly financed. However, I should also say that most of the research funds, not the wages all the time, but the research funds for extra expenses in doing research and so on and so forth, and in hiring extra people, comes from various foundations. And many of these foundations for financing research are public. In Sweden, there are numerous of them. Some are governed by representatives elected from the faculties of the universities, but some are also, how shall we say, appointed and governed by being appointed by the government or by the Ministry of Education or various public badas, right? Then they select what we should prioritize in our research. So, you know, the Norwegian Research Council, to take an example, and that is very dominating in Norway. There are few other research councils in Norway. In Sweden, there are more. In Denmark, there are more. But in Norway, it's very centralized. That research council is, in turn, very much financed by the various ministries. So they will design research projects, programs in cooperation with the various ministries. And the ministries come forward with extra money. So if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs indicates that there is more research needed on security because of the war in Ukraine now or something, then that will affect the priorities of the researchers. And all researchers, of course, are looking for research funds. So they prioritize their applications accordingly. Should I take that instead? Okay. Okay. So, so you see, it's public, and on paper, everybody say they would respect the autonomy of academicians and researchers, but de facto, we are quite sort of governed by the political priorities, by the priorities set up by various ministries, by various state agencies, and so on. With of course, we, the academicians, try, of course, to resist this, try to find our ways through the system, but it's definitely there, and it is that way of governing is still increasing, I'm afraid. I should also say that much of, if you were coming to Sweden, I'm a Swede, but I have been working for half my career in Norway at the University of Oslo. Now, I should say that in Sweden, I don't know the figures, but my estimate would be that most of the research, particularly within medical science and technology and so on, is private because it's with the corporations. So, you know, the big corporations have huge research departments. And Sweden is, of course, the most leading industrial nation in Scandinavia. So companies like Volvo, Asea Brown Boveri, AstraZeneca,
IKEA.
IKEA. I don't know if IKEA makes any research, but but the technologically high advanced international companies have huge research departments, they are also informally connected to the universities, right? So if you come to the University of Oslo, you will find that there is a kind of research village just outside the campus, where you'll find various institutions related to the university from the private sector or semi-private sector. If you come to my own private residence is on the west coast of Sweden and northwest coast of Sweden, close to Norway. The nearest city is the harbor city of Gothenburg, the second largest city in Sweden. It's our Liverpool, and there used to be the center of shipyards before industrialization in Korea, when they outcompeted us. Now, that city has a very reputed university for technology, which is called Chalmers University or Chalmers Institute. Now, their research and studies related to technology has always been very, very closely related to the shipyard industry and the technology industry. The ball bearing, the SKF, the one, you know, everyone who drives a car or has anything with a wheel knows that in the wheel there are small balls, right, to make it function. That's a Swedish invention from way back in time, and the center of production is in Gothenburg. Now, that is related very much to that university, but much of their research is private. Now, so we can continue like this. And since you once upon a time was military related, I can tell you that, you know, the production of defense equipment is, of course, also related to various, they have their own research, but also related to the education and research in universities, and so on and so forth. So it's an integrated business. Now, do you ask then, of course, how is this governed? Is it governed by oligarchs, or what is it? No, it's not. I mean, this is part of what we can talk about another day, of what is, I would call, kind of partnership governance. It's not, most of the governance, it's not informal. It is formalized by representatives in various bodies, in various boards. And based on that, in turn, they would say, okay, we form a project, we form a committee about it, and then there are additional people coming in. And all these people are more or less accountable. Then, of course, I'm not going to say that nothing is informal. There is a lot of informal governance. And for instance, they would say that most of the actual decisions are taken in the saunas. You know what a sauna is, where you go in and have your hot bath, right? Yeah, and it's very private. So there are of course these kind of gatherings where people are meeting and informal decisions are being made, but comparatively speaking, it is reasonably transparent and public. Then you can always discuss to what extent priorities should be set from the private sector or from other sectors.
politically, emphasis has been given to what these days is called evidence-based politics. Yes, yeah, evidence-based politics. That meaning that we should produce research or research-based politics, if you like. We should produce solid knowledge as a basis for political priorities. So that has been there all the time. And since the early 30s, when the Social Democrats came in power in most Scandinavian countries, they have been in cooperation with leading technology-oriented entrepreneurs and companies, productivity-driven companies, right? And so much of the production-oriented policies by social democratic governance has been based on cooperation with these companies and on research fostered, supported by the state. So if you want to have an aeroplane in military aeroplane, for instance, yes, then it's tight cooperation between the politicians, the defense ministries and authorities on the one hand, and those who build up the military factories, which is called Saab. It's not the car, but the airspace. So that kind of close cooperation is there and has been there since long. It has been very much fostering technological production-oriented research. But there's also, so now do you want to know what are other priorities in this? Well, basically, you know, Sweden has been based on technology and economy. So economists, business administration, economics they have gathered a lot of support and priority. If you turn to Norway, I would say Norway is less industrialized than Sweden. It's much more based on fishing originally, and now of course on but later on it was based on, has been based on oil, on petrol. But originally the research in Norway was much more focusing on sociology and public administration. Denmark, of course, is much more agricultural, small-scale industry, so hence that. Turning to Finland, traditionally forestry, timber, these kind of businesses, and so on. Enormous change in Norway when they discovered oil. So then a certain rise of technology and private also research in oil-based, oil-related knowledges. Yeah? Norway doesn't have so much of private industrial research as Sweden, but they have separate research institutes that cater to various needs in society. And these institutes are partly sponsored by on the market by, say, a trade union can ask for research, or a company can ask for research being conducted by this institute, but also being financed by the National Research Council. So much of, for instance, there would be a Peace Research Institute, there would be a research institute for regional and rural, regional and local administration, there would be an institute for the environment and development, and so on and so forth. And very commonly, influential politicians have founded these institutes. So, for instance, the Institute for Development and the Environment was, of course, funded by the Prime Minister Brundtland, who was the main author of the Sustainable Development Report once upon a time. So that kind of structure is there. If we now come to things that relate more to law, social science, sociology, and so on and so forth, what is being fostered these days? Well, the Social Democrats have all years through tried to support research related to work, the milieu and the work safety, public health related to that. So, and to research fostering and backing up the welfare state. Now, both of these have been related to a large extent to sociology departments. So, and separate research institutes related to this. So I could identify in all these countries various research institutes and various departments that have a lot of funding and a lot of education related to this. And when I say, and also education, of course, I mean, educating social workers and people working in the public health sector and so on. The more neoliberal oriented policies and the sort of conservative parties have downgraded that research, but it's still important. Then an upcoming major theme across the board is, of course, related to our climate and environment. So that is coming up, and it's all the way from technology to agriculture, to studies of sociological studies of how to do something with the climate, political, of course, and so on. So, you know, if you want to apply for any kind of research funds, you should mention environment. It should be in there. You may also want to mention gender relations. So everything that you can say is related to gender equality is deemed, you know, positive. It should be mainstreamed, which is the slogan. So environment and gender equality. Earlier, the mainstreaming, the catchword was equality. It's not as popular anymore. Let me have a brief look. Yes, international relations is, of course, also important. Both Norway and Sweden has a high profile, had a high profile when it came to international peace promotion and so on, peacekeeping, blah, blah. And Sweden in particular was very much interested in international development aid cooperation and democracy promotion and that sort of thing. It goes back to, in particular, to the period when we had a prime minister with the name of Olof Palme. Some of you may know of him. And he was, together with other social democratic giants like Willy Brandt, Bruno Kreisky, and others in Europe, and also Southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, Greece, all around, trying to promote North-South partnership. And this was, you know, very much in vogue, popular in the early 1970s as a result of the deregulation of the international economic system, when the Bretton Woods Institution for Regulation of the International Economy was scrapped by President Nixon in order to finance his war in Vietnam. So, and at the same time, you had the OPEC countries increasing the oil prices very much, and you had the low-cost industrialization coming up in East Asia. So there was a need, and that meant that the economies like in Sweden, which was nationally confined Keynesian economies, were undermined. So you had to try to internationalize a kind of Keynesian-based, demand-based global economy. And that was suggested in terms of a new economic world order, suggested through the United Nations, but it was also in the form of a report calling for North-South partnership. There were politicians from all around the world trying to promote this. From Indonesia, there were representatives as well. Interestingly, Adam Malik was involved in that once upon a time. Now, anyway, so that founded quite a lot of research, quite a lot of studies on the conditions in the global south, on the partners, and how to foster the best possible international aid and cooperation. Later on, it was also related to the process of democratization, human rights, and so on and so forth. This focus has come down, unfortunately. And that relates, of course, to the political swing and the increasing neo-nationalist sentiments around the globe, in Europe, in the United States, with President Trump, and in most parts of Europe, a neo-nationalist reaction to the globalization has been coming up, and it has also affected the Scandinavian countries, which have become more inward oriented. So this time, there is much less research on development conditions, particularly development conditions related to contextual studies, like here, or India, or Africa, or elsewhere. Once upon a time, Sweden was heavily involved in supporting the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. We were one of the most important sponsors of the ANC. We did research on how to foster these kinds of transformations in Africa, the liberation movements, and so on and so forth. You don't find anything of that these days. The focus is more on international relations in a pure sense, in terms of international diplomacy, to a certain extent, but not very much anymore in peacekeeping, and what else? On diplomacy, yes, and of course on conflicts. So conflict studies are crucial still, and it's bound to be a real rise in importance now for security studies related to the war in Ukraine and the effects of Russia's, I'm sorry to say, quite imperialistic politics. So we have now a situation where the belief in Europe on negotiated independence for various nations to be able to take their own decisions, and NATO to step back and not take such an active view, United Nations governed policies and so on, that has been reversed. So nobody trusts the agreements with Russia anymore, and therefore it's a build-up of research on how you can counter this and how you can handle this. Along with this, there's also much more emphasis on what is happening in societies when you get so many refugees all around Europe, but also coming up to Scandinavia. So, we had a situation where in 1 year, so many refugees came in from Syria and so on. Typically, I'm afraid to say, there wasn't much research on how one would do something in Syria to prevent these onslaught on the Arab Spring democracy efforts, and very little on how to contain the war. Sweden kept selling arms to some of those fighting in this area, while at the same time complaining about the fact that we got so many refugees. So this is now coming up in two respects. How does one handle the refugee crisis? A lot of research on this, but also what are the effects inside the countries when people are coming in, migrants are coming in, refugees are coming in. How do we integrate them? How do we help them to get work, etc., etc. This is now, of course, coming to virtually expand tremendously with the worst refugee crisis after the Second World War, of millions and millions of people having to flee from Ukraine. So these are some of, you see, most of these priorities you will realize are quite related to priorities, political, current, contemporary priorities in the sun. So you ask them, but what is then governed by the researchers themselves? And I would say that it's not much, because most of the universities do not have their own funds for research, minus the fact that we as lecturers, as professors, are expected to also do research. So, oh yeah, part of our wages are there to finance research. And it's written in the fine papers of policies that education all the way down to the base level should be research-based in terms of standing on the shoulders of research results and so on and so forth. But so we should keep ourselves, updated on the research front, sort of. But to finance our research, we most of the time have to go to the research councils, we have to go to various donors and so on and so forth to find the finance. Fortunately, at the University of Oslo, at the politics department, we have had since a number of years a little bit of a sort of pocket money for each professor. You can go to one or two conferences and you can buy a few books and that sort of thing. But it's not more than that. Aside from that, you'll have to have your research funds and apply for it. How am I doing in time?
Another 15 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. I have not mentioned human rights. That has also been a major priority. Democracy studies, but also human rights. So and that has tended to be partly in the law faculties, but also in separate institutes. And they managed to get reasonable funding because it has been kind of politically in vogue to foster and study human rights. Let me now turn to, let me see if I forgot something. Well, a little bit, but less than earlier, has been related to work life, to the interest of trade unions and so on. A little bit up and down. I mean, but not very much, strangely enough, even though we have had social democratic governments in most of the Scandinavian countries for so long period of time. We have also, just to give you one example of neglected factors, we have quite a lot of studies of public administration. And public administration in Scandinavia since the late 19th century is deemed to be reasonably immune against corruption. We have a decent public administration, and at some point of time, you may ask me questions about why it is like that and so on, the history. I can't go into that now, but studies of public administration has been a major research area. However, you can say that the level of informal corruption, and now I'm talking of informal corruption, not in terms of giving envelopes or something like that to each other, but in terms of informal contacts, in the form of having networks, in the form of what used to be called social capital, is very widespread and not very well researched. we think of ourselves as being non-corrupt, but on the informal level, very, very much is going on. It's not necessarily the fact that you get money in your pocket for in that sector or by doing this, but you get better possibility of perhaps getting a position, of applying for research funds, of managing to get your policy proposals through in the government or on various levels. So in the form of informal lobbying, if you put it that way, that is common. That is not very much studied. Sweden and Denmark and Norway would do very well by somebody from Indonesia who knows much better on issues of corruption to come and study us.
Okay.
And what is going on. So that is really something which should be done. Okay, let me now turn to how are the students doing in this system. All public education is free, no charge. Tutoring fees and all of that you can forget about. There is nothing like that. In public schools and so on and so forth, you get the books and everything for free. However, due to the neoliberal impact, the impact of neoliberal and public management, we have, and this is a real tragedy, much of the public schooling has been broken up. So there is now a kind of vouchers for the pupils to go to private school. So private school can get a kind of voucher from the public sector to start schools. So increasingly many from the level up to the gymnasium, to the high schools, are now private, particularly in Sweden. And so I'm not saying that it is to the level as in Chile after Pinochet in Latin America, but we are not far from it. And this is a tragedy because I would say, because the grading system is getting undermined, we get a social, what do you call it? Upper class people tend to go to certain schools. Yeah. No, not so much boarding schools, but you know, if your parents are in good economic position, they would prefer to send their kids to this and that school. It's not that calls for economic resources so much, but because it calls for contact knowledge about where the kids should go, and it calls for coaching, as it's called, right? Because you suddenly prefer to send your kid to a school which is in the other part of the town or in the city. So therefore you have to have some resources to take your kid to that school, and so on and so forth. So this is breaking up one of the basic but going to the same public schools has been a basic prerequisite for any kind of integration of people, of promoting equality on a social basis, to get people to cooperate, to learn to know each other, to promote contacts between upper and lower classes, and so on and so forth. All of this is now being broken down, and it's a catastrophe. And now liberal parties are also realizing there is a problem with this. We have to counter it in various ways. And of course, social democrats and leftist parties are against it. So there is a counter movement, but it has affected Sweden very much. It has not yet reached the level of higher education to the same extent. So in the universities, people from lower classes and upper classes still meet and gather and enjoy themselves. But it's creeping into that system. Now, if you go to universities, how do you finance that? Well, there is no tutoring fee, there is no entrance fee and that sort of thing. But you have to pay your books, you have to pay for your living. For this, you can take subsidized loans. You get a subsidy which comes to 1/4 of what it takes to survive for a month or something. The rest you have to finance by state subsidized loans, or you have rich parents subsidizing you, or you take extra jobs, right? But it is possible it is possible for low-class people to get into the system by taking these state loans, and you don't pay any interest rate on them to talk of, and you can then pay back later on when you get a job. This is crucial for the possibility of having a reasonably equal wage-based policies in society. Nobody can say that they had to invest huge sums of money to become a lawyer or become a medical doctor or something like that. So they can't come out and say, I have to have much higher wage because I invested so and so much in my education. So that is a very basic prerequisite for a welfare state and a reasonable equality. However, that is being undermined later on now by the increasing financial sectors and the fact that people are not making so much money from their wages as from investments in houses and real estate and that sort of thing. But that's within brackets, right? So as a student, you can still get into the system and you can survive within the system. And who are doing best? When I entered university in the early 1970s, 1970 actually, it was primarily young men like me, not so many women. And the women who were there were mainly learning to become nurses and teachers and all of that. Very few in political science and studies of history. Of course, they were in humanities. I forgot to say that humanities are always been downgraded in Sweden. You know, that's nothing which is given so much importance to because it doesn't promote growth to the same extent. These days, who are doing best? The women, the young girls. And it goes also for the basic education in the various schools. It's the women who do best. They are coming up and they are getting the best grades. They are making enormous advancements. How come? Well, I think primarily because of quite successful public policy to promote gender equality, to make it possible for women to get out in public life, to take jobs, to get their education, to resist, more bullying and whatever, sexual harassment and all these kind of things. And by getting jobs, women can also afford to divorce, stand on their own feet, getting subsidies from public to raise the kids and get kindergartens and so on and so forth. All these things have fostered, I think, what is the major change in Scandinavian countries, the major positive change, which is gender equality. And that is not just changing life for women, it is definitely also changing life for men. Some of us are getting, of course, increasingly frustrated with it, but most of us accept it and say it's fine, it's good, and it does change public life. It does change not just public life, it changed life sort of in the families, inside the bedroom even, and I think this, you know, is the most positive change, and it changes the level of education and also the priorities in the educational institutions. So that is the most positive change that I can notice, and and women coming into the system are changing the priorities to a certain extent also in what we are doing research about and how we are doing it. So to end on a positive note, I think that is the most important thing. I have left now aside the specific stories about social science and the priorities within social science and all of that. I was under the understanding that we would perhaps return to that later, or shall, if you want me to explore that or expand on that, you'll ask me questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sebelum kita mulai sesi untuk tanya jawab atau diskusinya, ada beberapa poin yang saya rangkum dari penjelasan Olle tadi terkait dengan sistem pendidikan, kemudian fokus research topik yang sekarang sedang digeluti di kampus-kampus di Skandinavia. Yang pertama mengenai sistem pendidikan, ya sistem pendidikan Skandinavia umumnya semua universitas negeri, jadi mirip-mirip UPN gitu, universitas paling negeri, semuanya negeri di sana. Walau demikian, mungkin dekade terakhir dengan menguatnya sistem atau pandangan NPM, New Public Management, kemudian menguatnya neoliberalisme menurut Olle, itu agak sedikit mengubah bagaimana universitas di Skandinavia beroperasi. Sama seperti di kita, dosen-dosen wajib atau dituntut untuk menunjukkan produktivitas publikasinya, research-nya, dan seterusnya, dan semuanya dinilai atau ditera berdasarkan publikasi di Scopus, publikasi di jurnal Sinta berapa, dan seterusnya, dan seterusnya. Dan itu akan menurut dia bagaimana kemudian kehidupan para dosen di luar mengajar, terutama di research-nya. Yang lain adalah keberadaan Research Council di negara-negara Skandinavia. Research Council ini sangat menentukan. Mereka menentukan terkait alokasi sumber dana yang disebarkan atau yang diberikan kepada topik-topik atau area of studies tertentu. Mengapa? Karena mereka umumnya mendapatkan dana dari dua pihak. Yang pertama dari kementerian-kementerian, yang kedua juga dari private sector, dari lembaga swasta. Jadi misalkan kalau Research Council-nya mendapatkan dana yang besar dari Kementerian Luar Negeri, contohnya Olle tadi, nah Kemlu di Swedia atau Kemlu di Norwegia sekarang ini sedang isu apa. Dan tentu saja mereka meminta atau mengorder topik-topik penelitian berdasarkan kepentingan atau kebutuhan Kemlu-nya. Kalau yang banyak memberikan sumbangan dana-dana penelitian adalah misalkan ekonominya, tentu dia akan kaitkan dengan ekonomi yang sesuai dengan proyeksi atau prediksi ekonomi Swedia atau Norwegia ke depannya seperti apa. Begitu juga untuk private company. Di private company mereka sudah sejak lama membuat semacam hubungan-hubungan informal dengan kampus, ya. Mereka mendanai proyek-proyek tertentu, khususnya tadi yang diberikan contoh oleh riset-riset yang berhubungan dengan high-tech, yang berhubungan dengan ekonomi, itu untuk di Swedia. Kalau untuk di Norwegia terkait dengan perikanan dan juga oil atau perminyakan. Nah, jadi perusahaan-perusahaan ini mendanai research secara informal, membuka semacam research institute kerjasama kolaborasi dengan pihak-pihak perguruan tinggi. Di lain sisi, pihak perguruan tinggi kemudian menyesuaikan dirinya, baik melalui kurikulumnya baik melalui pengajarannya, untuk supaya outputnya atau keluarannya itu bisa sesuai dengan apa yang sedang booming baik di pemerintahan maupun di sektor industri. Jadi penelitian dan pengajaran di Skandinavia sebenarnya integrated business antara pihak pemerintah, pihak swasta, dan pihak perguruan tingginya sendiri. Jadi itu merupakan suatu hal yang terintegrasi. Ada yang diatur secara formal melalui Research Council, ada yang diatur secara informal melalui private research institute yang didanai oleh pihak-pihak swasta. Nah, sekarang mengenai sistem pembayarannya sendiri untuk public education dari SD sampai perguruan tinggi gratis, ya. Walau demikian, sekarang kemudian untuk sekolah-sekolah, terutama sekolah dasar dan menengah, mulai mengalami pergeseran karena mereka bisa mendapatkan voucher dari pihak swasta yang kemudian membuat sekolah-sekolah itu sedikit berubah karakternya dari public school menjadi semi sekolah swasta. Untuk perguruan tinggi semuanya gratis, tidak ada uang kuliah, tidak ada biayanya, terkecuali buku dan living cost. Jadi untuk kos-kosan, untuk makan, minum, dan transportasi itu dibiayai sendiri. Tapi negara menyediakan semacam pinjaman tanpa bunga yang bisa dibayar kemudian setelah yang bersangkutan lulus. Dan student loan ini menurut Olle menjadi dasar atau menjadi fondasi masyarakat sosial demokratik dan sistem welfare state di Skandinavia bisa terbentuk. Nah, untuk yang kedua mengenai fokus topik-topik kajian. Fokus topik kajian saat ini seperti dia katakan sebelumnya ditentukan oleh area of interest dari kementerian maupun dari pihak swasta. Ada beberapa topik yang sekarang sedang happening, begitu. Misalkan mengenai conflict studies, mengenai security studies, mengenai diplomasi, mengenai refugee, ya, mengenai refugee apa bahasa Indonesia ya, pengungsi, gitu. Nah itu topik-topik yang saat ini sedang booming di universitas-universitas di Skandinavia, juga akibat karena perang yang terjadi, mulai perang di Jazirah Arab, ya, perang di Irak, perang di Afghanistan, dan juga perang di Suriah, dan terakhir perang di Ukraina. Topik-topik konvensional atau tradisional seperti human rights, peace dialogue, development, pembangunan, topik-topik ekonomi pembangunan, sekarang menurut dia sedang menurun. Ya, jadi topik-topik itu tergantikan dengan yang security conflict studies. Begitu juga dengan topik mengenai gender, ya, masih ada tapi tidak sedominan 1 atau 2 dekade abad sebelumnya. Nah ini yang menurut Olle menjadi kurang lebih apa yang saat ini sedang diminati oleh kampus-kampus di Skandinavia. Di luar topik FISIP tadi ada beberapa topik lagi. Dia menyebutkan seperti climate and environment. Ini topik yang juga sekarang sedang booming, sedang happening di kampus-kampus di Skandinavia, terutama juga terkait dengan energi bersih dan energi terbarukan. Oke. Itu kurang lebih rangkuman saya atas pemaparan yang diberikan oleh Profesor Tornquist. Silakan jika Bapak dan Ibu ada yang mau ditanyakan, kita buka sesi dialognya. Silakan. We'll hear
Yes, please.
from the audience and then you will respond. Silakan.
Thank you, Olle, for the sharing. I have some questions. I hope not too much. Well, I was in Oslo, University of Oslo for summer course, long time ago, and quite impressed with the village that you mentioned. Well, I was in studying politics and gender studies, taking 3 or 4 courses for 2 months, I think. So I'm not. I mean, we also had a chance to go to the parliament and some historic, the Viking Museum. That's iconic. Yeah, I have a question though. You mentioned that universities got money from the government, some ministries, according to their interest, but also from corporates, of course, with their interests also, right? So my question would be, how do you maintain your academic freedom and independency from your research? That is one. The other one is because I'm currently the director for the research and community service unit in the university. I'd like to ask something related to research and community service. For the what do you call that, research center, in universities in Norway or in Sweden, is it under the universities for the management, or is it in the school of faculties? And what is the role of, I mean, how can research studies, what do you call that, get their own money, and is it going to the university, the money, or how do you manage research studies in universities in Sweden and Norway?
Are you referring to community?
No, research and community. Yeah, and I know it's in Indonesia in particular. I mean, I've been to other universities in other countries. They're not specifically mentioned about community service, right? And it's like a weird thing. You interact with the communities, but you don't do community service, right? You do research, but yeah, how is it in the university? Thank you.
So first, about academic freedom. It is, how shall we say, on the level of official ideology, on the level of generally accepted principles in the society, etc., etc. The norm, generally accepted, is there must be academic freedom. There must be nobody shall intervene in. There are 2 levels of this. The first basic level is nobody shall intervene in your research work when you're conducting the research. Okay. But the next level of picking the priorities on what you do research about, that is contested. You can, if you are tenured in any department, you're free to do whatever research you like, as long as you have the time in your position to do some research, but not so much more. In Norway, we still have the situation that associate professors and professors have 50% of their wage, of their time, paid time, to do research. Okay, that's fair enough. You don't have that in Sweden. In Sweden, it's less. I can't remember the situation in Denmark, but probably a little bit more like in Norway. So it's better in Norway. So now you know I'm retired, but So I'm free to do whatever research, but I'm not in an executive position and I don't have any research money. But anyway, so when I was a full professor and employed, I could use 50% of my time to do research. Now, then the question is, how do I finance that? Well, as I said earlier, the fortunate thing in the University of Oslo in my department was we had some pocket money. So, okay, I could go to a few conferences and I could buy a few books. But in addition to that, I would have to get research funds from outside. And of course, I could go to the library and that sort of thing. But you know, and I could get some laptop for my work and all that. But other expenses, I had to go outside. Now, then you ask, the next question is then to uphold integrity. That is, of course, who decides what research is being supported. And as I said earlier, it's increasingly governed by political priorities. Priorities not necessarily set by the government, but set by politically appointed or informally politically appointed in the government agencies, public agencies. So what they ask for, what they feel to be interested in, much more explicit than in Sweden. Norway is a much more politically governed country than Sweden. So the priorities of the Research Council is directly dependent on the priorities of the various ministries. So Department for I don't know if there is a department for oil or something, but department related to the oil production, whatever that department might be called, or ministry might be called, or the various agencies surrounding it, they would be able to finance various research programs at the Research Council. Now, at the Research Council, then they appoint a committee of reputed scholars and experts. And these scholars and experts are then autonomously deciding what projects should be given money. But there is a what do you call that? There is a kind of aim of that research program. So one way or the other, it is mentioning what is prioritized. Okay. Now, the researchers have the possibility of looking at that document. Terms of reference is the term, right? Terms of reference for that program. So if I was interested in applying for money there, I would have the possibility of looking into it. Okay. And then the next thing I would do is to check up who are in the committee. Yes. And then I would think my first question to myself would be, am I willing to subordinate my own academic integrity and autonomy to these terms of references and these women and men sitting on the board and taking the decisions? And they also send out to referees, of course, whose name I don't know, but I can figure out a little bit by knowing the people in the committee. Okay. Now, so this is how it works, right? And then you know how. Well, I was about to say you know how it works, but I'm here to tell you how it works. Anyway, so right. So I know then what people are sitting there and what people are bureaucrats in that research programs. So I will understand roughly who are the referees. And then by having an idea about that, I would design my research proposal and what research questions I give priority to, and what previous research I'm referring to, because you usually start by saying this is a vital subject given the previous knowledge we have and what we need to proceed with and what we need to find out more about given what we know earlier, the intellectual discourse, the public discourse, and so on and so forth. And so if we turn to social science for a while, if I'm interested in citizenship questions, for instance, and if there is a research funding for that, I would, of course, look at who are sitting in that council, and I would, and who are taking the judgments, making the judgments, and then I would pick my references in my. I would pick what I referred to in previous research, keeping in mind what I presume that these researchers are interested in. So, if I was doing research on, let's say, active citizenship in Latin American country or something, I would know who are sitting there in the committee, and I would know that some of them are possibly interested in studies of insurgent citizenship. So I would make references to that. I mean, this is the way the whole system works, I'm afraid. And in the various research institutes, not on the university department level, but in the research institutes, they have special people to help you write these proposals. So they are, they are like almost like lobbyists. They know much better than I do what people are sitting on the research committees and what people have influence over the priorities and what you should refer to. And they know how to write these proposals so that they are easy to read, convincing, making the correct references to things that are in vogue, and so on and so forth. So the Prior Research Institute of Peace and Conflict Research, or the Institute for Regional Development or whatever, would have people who help you to do this. And those of us who are in the ordinary university department are less skilled in doing that. Then there is in all the countries, there would also be some research council funds unspecified. So they are supposed to cater to people who can argue that from the point of view of previous research made in my field, we need to take another advancement, we need to proceed. We know this and this on active citizenship, we need, from previous research, we need to go ahead by asking questions about this and that. That is the most highly competitive area of applying for research. It is very difficult to get the funds, and it helps if you are well reputed, if you are up and you are very skilled in referring to the discourses and so on and so forth that the people who are sitting making judgments relate to. So it's not easy to get those money. And also in that level, there is an informal kind of, I would say, priority to themes which are in vogue. Yeah. Community service and that sort of thing. We are asked as university lecturers and professors and so on to not just publish in academic journals, but we are very much asked to publish in academic journals. Writing books is not popular. Editing anthologies is not giving you many points in the counting of new public management system. Books are not popular kind of thing. You should write articles in academic journals. And they don't look into whether you more or less copy your own things and send to various places and so on. It's awful. Anyway, but we are also asked to contribute to the public discourse by writing publicly, popularly, more semi-popularly about our research, to make the research known. We should teach, we should do research and publish research. We should, and that is the sort of third task, is to contribute to the public discourse by making our results known and take part in the public discussion on the basis of our research. We are not asked to act as sort of public intellectuals in the sense of just, stating our mind and contribute to the public discussion in general, but it should be research based. But then, of course, nobody accuses you if you take it. But if you participate very, very often in the public discourse on all kinds of things which don't necessarily relate specifically to your research, then you might not be so popular in the academic circles. Then they would say, oh, he or she is just out to get fame. But we are, if somebody calls me from the public service radio or television and say, can you come to the studio tonight because we have a program discussing the war in Ukraine and we think you can contribute, or what the current developments in Indonesia and something. I'm supposed to go there for free. I'm not supposed to ask anything for that because it's part of my duty to do that. However, I'm not necessarily supposed to contribute to community development or anything like that, but to contribute to the public discourse. Yeah.
Ya, yang lain Bapak Ibu jika ada yang mau ditanyakan.
I said very much about international cooperation, I realize. Shall I use 2 minutes on doing that? Okay. There is a lot of international cooperation, but it's usually commonly directed to the European countries and European institutions and the North American institutions, and previously to a certain extent also to the Eastern European institutions, though less so, of course, because the research and academic life in the former Soviet Union and Eastern states were not autonomous or reasonably autonomous, and it's not getting that now either. Research cooperation with the Global South has been related very much to those areas, those parts of the Global South, which the Nordic countries are involved in with development cooperation. So since Sweden or Norway, well, we take Sweden first. Sweden has not been very much involved in development cooperation with Indonesia. We haven't done almost anything here as far as I know. Hence, there has also not been very much international cooperation from the universities. But there may be influence from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to say that we are interested in promoting democracy and human rights. So then those working on democracy and human rights on the university level may get some funding to get involved here, but not much. There may also be, some people saying, okay, we should cooperate more generally in terms of, let's say, environmental questions. All right, then again, to research councils and also some extra money being made available by the Agency for International Cooperation, and some researchers may come there. They may also then realize that in order to do this kind of research and so on, they are also interested in making contacts in countries like Indonesia. So, okay, they may be involved in promoting some education, some research there. On paper to support the development of research and studies here, but primarily, I think, but anyway, to make good contacts which can be made use of in other respects. Let me take an example. I was involved in promoting cooperation between Swedish municipalities and municipalities in Indonesia, supposedly to promote local democracy in Indonesia. Hence, but I found out after quite some time that their main interest was not at all to promote local democracy. because when I said that, okay, I know a bit about this, can we then design the research and the cooperation according to how we can best promote democratic development in municipalities in Indonesia? But they were not interested. They wanted to get in touch with people on the local level in Indonesia who were interested in garbage collection or environmental protection. And why were they interested in that? They were interested in that because they wanted to promote trade and technological development in that respect. So that is how it may work. Let me take another example, which is not necessarily to make all of us very cynical, but the follow-up program for studies of democratic development in Indonesia that took place at the UGM was, we managed in the end to get some money to follow up that. And how did we manage to do that? Well, you see, the Norwegian Crown Prince was to make a official visit to Indonesia, and he had to have some gift in his pocket, and that would the initial attempt, they tried first to have this gift related to environmental matters, but it didn't work because the studies related to this, studies of this in Indonesia didn't work very well. So they finally came to me and said, can we do this at the UGM instead? So the Crown Prince came to UGM and was walking around and making himself known there, and could provide some little money for the studies. Of course, it's also to promote democracy. The Crown Prince is a decent guy. He wanted probably to do that, and Norwegians can say they did it. But of course, it was to promote business and other diplomatic contacts with Indonesia. The same thing, actually, when it comes to human rights dialogue. There have been dialogues between Scandinavian countries, particularly Norway and Indonesia, and they sponsor, the Norwegian side sponsor various studies on human rights, various educational programs to promote human rights, including within the military service and so on in Indonesia. And they have sessions when they sit and talk about various human rights issues and so on and so forth. The main issue here again is, of course, to foster human rights, but also to establish contacts with people in the public administration, with people in government. When I suggested that the human rights dialogue should focus and go through Komnas HAM, there was much less in. Komnas HAM is not a place where the high-placed people share with influence and who can bridge Norwegian business and whatever is located. So this is how it works. There are also some money for international education, but not much. You must realize that the Scandinavian countries didn't have a colonial empire. Our imperialism was way back in the 17th century and so on, primarily ripping off central parts of Europe, not the global south. We have not a colonial past. We have not, like Holland, like Netherlands, or Britain, or French and Spain. We don't have contacts established since the colonial period. We don't have archives that are attractive for you. We don't feel any particular responsibility for what we have done in the past. We've just been trading things to help the real colonizers, kind of. So all of the international relations in education is related to pure interest in promoting the standard of education, to promoting the standard of research in Sweden, and also pay for what it costs in terms of some exchange of accepting exchange students and so on, and a little bit to promote, to be sort of development promotion, but not very much. I'm afraid that's the situation. Now, final word about this. There is a tendency, a very innocent tendency in the Scandinavian countries to say that this cooperation should be based on institutions. And now when I'm talking about institutions, now I'm not talking about institutions in terms of rules and regulations. I'm talking in terms of, university departments or university institutes and that sort of thing, right? And they like this to be on the both ends, to be governed by an institute in Sweden or Norway and an institute here or in India or elsewhere. They don't know that there may be difficult for good scholars to make their way through various institutes in these countries. In some cases, you may have some autonomy here. You may be in a majority in your institute, so you can govern this in a way, in a good way. But if you sit in the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi these days, you are dominated by the right-wing Hindu fundamentalist government that intervenes in the university affairs, and the only way of doing decent cooperation with that university is to go through individual scholars who are genuine academicians. However, that is not fully recognized by the funding agencies in Scandinavian countries, so it makes life very difficult in many cases.
Oke, silakan Bu, jika ada yang mau ditanyakan, masih ada waktu. Mas Adi, Mas Ridwan, yang lainnya silakan. Nggak ada lagi? Cukup? Okay. I think that's all, Olle. Thank you very much for your explanation on the research interest, how the universities in the Scandinavian countries operates, and how this international cooperation in terms of research and education can be done and fostered in the future. Again, thank you for your kind explanation, and we would like to have you back around 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lunch. Yeah, sure. Yeah. You can have disediain ya? Disediain? Oh, di depan. Di meja regis. Oh ya, oke. Mau foto bersama dulu? Boleh?
Oke, untuk seluruh hadirin mungkin mohon izin diundang untuk, karena kita akan foto bersama dengan Profesor Olle Tornquist. Pada Bapak dan Ibu dosen dipersilahkan untuk ke depan. Yes, photo session. Mas, backgroundnya ini ya? Oke. Ya, di depan. Front. Wajib. Negara. Ya,